Hey guys, tonight we begin with something brutal, bloody, and surprisingly smelly. We're diving into what life was really like as a Viking. Forget the horned helmets and noble warriors Hollywood sold you. The truth, you probably wouldn't survive breakfast, let alone a raid. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 950 CE. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're about to wish you weren't. Your bed is a wooden platform covered with animal furs that haven't been properly cleaned since, well, never. There's no memory foam, no Egyptian cotton sheets, just the pelts of animals you probably had to kill yourself. The smell is a symphony of wet wool, old blood, and something that might charitably be called musk, but is more accurately described as biological warfare. You blink awake to the sound of someone puking outside your longhouse. It's not unusual. Between the fermented fish, the sour ale, and the general state of Viking hygiene, someone's always expelling something from some orifice. Your longhouse is a wooden structure about 100 feet long, shared with your extended family, their livestock, and whatever parasites have decided to make you their permanent home. The walls are made of wood and turf, which sounds cozy until you realize that turf is just a polite word for dirt and grass that leaks when it rains. And it always rains in Scandinavia. The roof is thatched, which means it's basically a giant sponge that occasionally drips mystery liquids onto your face while you sleep. Privacy? What's that? You're sleeping in a communal space with your parents, siblings, cousins, in-laws, and probably someone's goat. Everyone can hear everything, every snore, every fart, every midnight romantic encounter. It's like reality TV, but with more dysentery and less editing. The fire pit in the center of the longhouse has died down to smoldering embers, which means the temperature inside has dropped to somewhere between uncomfortably cold and why are my toes blue. There's no central heating, no thermostat, just the eternal struggle between freezing to death and accidentally setting your hair on fire. You try to stretch but immediately regret it because your joints sound like a ship's rigging in a storm. You're 25 years old, which in Viking terms makes you practically ancient. Your spine creaks, your knees crack, and your shoulders feel like they've been used as a battering ram, which, knowing your luck, they probably have. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth mixed with rushes, straw, and the accumulated detritus of daily life. It's wet, it's slimy, and it moves when you step on it. Sometimes the movement is just decomposing organic matter. Sometimes it's something with more legs than you're comfortable with. Welcome to morning in Viking Norway, where the sun is a rumor, the floor is an ecosystem, and your biggest concern isn't whether you'll have a good day, it's whether you'll survive until noon. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So you've managed to crawl out of your fur-covered horror show of a bed. Congratulations. Now nature calls, and it's not asking politely. It's bellowing like a berserker who's just discovered his ale has been watered down. Here's where you start missing modern plumbing more than you've ever missed anything in your life. There's no toilet, no toilet paper, no privacy, and definitely no air freshener. In Viking society, relieving yourself is less of a private moment and more of a communal experience that everyone pretends not to notice, but absolutely judges you for. If you're lucky, your longhouse has a designated spot out back, a simple wooden seat over a pit that's been dug into the permanently frozen ground. If you're unlucky, you're squatting behind the nearest tree and hoping no one's watching. Spoiler alert, someone's always watching. Vikings don't believe in privacy the way we understand it. To them, bodily functions are just part of life, like raiding monasteries or dying of infected wounds. The toilet paper situation is particularly grim. Your options include moss, if you can find some that isn't frozen solid, leaves, ditto, smooth stones, Hope you've got steady hands, or simply air drying and hoping for the best. Some Vikings used wool scraps, but wool was valuable, so that was reserved for special occasions, like when you had dysentery and needed all the help you could get. Winter makes everything exponentially worse. Imagine trying to do your business when it's negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind is howling like the wild hunt, and your nether regions are in immediate danger of frostbite. Vikings were tough, but they weren't immune to the laws of physics or hypothermia. But wait, it gets better, because there's no sewage system, no drainage, no waste management of any kind. All of this organic matter just accumulates around your living space, mixing with animal waste, food scraps, and whatever unfortunate creatures have died in the vicinity recently. The smell is indescribable. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 100, then leave it to ferment for several months in sub-zero temperatures. Now add the charming aroma of rotting fish, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke. That's your neighborhood air quality. Disease spreads faster than gossip at a thing assembly. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, they're not just possibilities, they're inevitabilities. The average Viking's relationship with their digestive system is less partnership and more ongoing armed conflict. And hygiene, well, let's just say that the phrase cleanliness is next to godliness would have been met with blank stares and possibly an axe to the face. Vikings bathed occasionally, usually when they could no longer stand their own smell, which was saying something. But daily hygiene was about as common as peaceful negotiations with Christian monks. So whether you're the Jarl of the settlement or the lowest thrall, morning bathroom time is a humiliating, freezing, potentially disease-spreading adventure that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. One slip on the icy ground, and you're face first in humanity's frozen leftovers. And you still haven't had breakfast, but we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice warm breakfast? Something hearty and delicious to fuel your day of raiding and pillaging? Sorry, this is Viking Norway. Nothing is nice, nothing is warm, and delicious is a concept that won't be invented for another 1,000 years. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is whatever didn't spoil overnight, which isn't much, because food preservation in the 10th century is less of a science and more of a desperate prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Your morning meal is typically a bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off the bottom of a longboat and tastes worse. Let's start with the staple, porridge. Not the creamy sweet oatmeal you're thinking of. This is a grey, lumpy substance made from whatever grains survived the harvest, mixed with water that may or may not have been boiled long enough to kill the things living in it. Sometimes there are chunks of barley or rye floating in it, like tiny islands of disappointment. Sometimes those chunks move on their own. The porridge is served in a wooden bowl that's been carved from a tree that died of natural causes, approximately never. It's been seasoned by years of use, which means it's absorbed the flavors of every meal that's ever been served in it, plus whatever bacteria have decided to call it home. The spoon, if you're lucky enough to have one, is carved from horn or wood and has the texture of sandpaper. Want some protein with that? Great. Here's yesterday's leftover fish. It was caught sometime last week, preserved by hanging it in the rafters where the smoke from the fire could get to it. The preservation process has given it the consistency of shoe leather and the flavor of what you'd imagine shoe leather would taste like if it had been soaked in brine and left to age in a barn. No refrigeration means no fresh anything. That fish might be preserved, but it's also home to a thriving ecosystem of microorganisms that are probably plotting their revenge on your digestive system. The Vikings called this delicacy stockfish, and it was considered a valuable trade commodity, which tells you everything you need to know about Viking taste buds. Bread exists, but it's not what you're thinking. This is dense, dark, coarse stuff made from rye, barley, or whatever grain could grow in the short Nordic summer. It's so hard you could use it as a weapon. In fact, many Vikings probably did. Day-old Viking bread could stop an arrow. Week-old Viking bread could demolish a wall. The bread is often bulked up with whatever was available. ground bark, acorns, peas, beans, and sometimes things that were definitely not meant for human consumption, but ended up in there anyway, because starvation makes you creative. Dairy products are available if you own cows, which most people don't. But if you do, you get milk that's been sitting around long enough to develop its own personality, butter that's rancid more often than not, and cheese that could be used as a biological weapon. For drinks, you have a few options. Water, which is probably contaminated with everything that's ever lived, died, or been excreted upstream. Ale, which is weak, sour, and tastes like someone forgot to clean the brewing equipment since the last ice age. Or milk, which we've already established is basically a science experiment in dairy form. And spices, seasoning, the concept of flavor. Well, if you're wealthy enough to trade with merchants from distant lands, you might have access to salt. Real salt, not the stuff you scrape off rocks near the ocean that tastes like low tide and broken dreams. So you sit there, in your wet, smoky longhouse, chewing your way through breakfast with the enthusiasm of someone digging their own grave. Your teeth hurt because dental hygiene is a foreign concept. Your stomach churns because everything you're eating is trying to kill you, and your mouth tastes like regret mixed with fish oil. But hey, at least you're getting calories. You're going to need them for the back-breaking labor that's about to consume the rest of your day. And trust me, back-breaking isn't just a figure of speech. Now that you've choked down your breakfast and your stomach has stopped actively rebelling, it's time to get dressed. Not that you have many options. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly what you're wearing, plus maybe one spare tunic if you're particularly wealthy, or if someone in your family died recently and left you their clothes. Let's start with the basics. Your undergarments, which don't exist. The concept of underwear won't be invented for several centuries, so you're going commando under layers of rough, scratchy fabric that feels like it was woven from anger and disappointment. The closest thing to underclothes you have is a linen shirt, if you're lucky enough to own linen. Most Vikings make do with wool or hemp, which has the texture of medieval sandpaper. Your main garment is a tunic that reaches somewhere between your knees and ankles, depending on how tall you are and how much fabric your family could afford. It's held together with brooches, pins, and hope. The fabric is undyed wool in its natural color, which ranges from dirty sheep to really dirty sheep. If you're wealthy, you might have a tunic dyed with expensive imported colors. If you're poor, you have whatever color the sheep happen to be. Over this goes a cloak, because it's always cold in Scandinavia. Always. The cloak is made of thick wool, fastened with a brooch at the shoulder, and it's your primary defense against the elements. It's also your blanket, your tent, your towel, and occasionally your shroud if things go really badly. The brooch that holds your cloak is important. It's both functional and a status symbol. Rich Vikings have elaborate silver or gold brooches decorated with intricate designs. Poor Vikings have whatever they could trade for, steal, or make themselves out of whatever metal they could find. Your brooch says a lot about you, your wealth, your status, your success as a raider, and how likely you are to survive the next harsh winter. Your pants, if you wear them, are loose-fitting and made of wool or linen. They're held up with a belt, because elastic hasn't been invented yet. The belt is also where you hang your most important possessions. Your knife, everyone carries a knife. Your eating utensil, if you have one, and maybe a small pouch for whatever valuables you own. Footwear is where things get really grim. Your shoes are made of leather that's been cured using methods that would make a modern person vomit. The leather is often brain-tanned, which means it was soaked in animal brains to make it supple. The smell never quite goes away. The shoes are basically leather bags tied around your feet with leather straps. There's no left or right shoe. They're identical and equally uncomfortable. In winter, you stuff your shoes with hay, moss, or animal fur to provide insulation. This works about as well as you'd expect, which is to say not at all. Your feet are perpetually cold, wet, and in various stages of frostbite. Trench foot isn't just a World War I problem. It's a Viking Tuesday. Socks exist, but they're more like foot wrappings made of cloth or thin leather. They provide about as much protection as a strongly worded letter to winter itself. And let's not forget about cleanliness. These clothes aren't washed regularly because soap is expensive and water is often frozen. You wear the same outfit for weeks or months at a time until it literally falls apart or becomes so encrusted with dirt, sweat, and other biological deposits that it can stand up on its own. The fabric attracts every parasite in the known world. Lice, fleas, bedbugs, and things that don't have names yet all consider your clothing their permanent residence. You're not just wearing clothes, you're hosting a mobile ecosystem of tiny creatures that bite, itch, and lay eggs in places you'd rather not think about. Your hair, if you're a man, might be long and braided, or it might be short and practical. If you're a woman, it's definitely long, and usually braided or covered. Hair care consists of occasionally running your fingers through it and hoping for the best. Brushes exist, but they're made of animal bristles, and about as gentle as a wire brush on sunburned skin. Washing your hair involves cold water, maybe some lye soap if you're lucky, and a lot of wishful thinking. Most Vikings just accepted that their hair would always smell like smoke, grease, and whatever they'd been doing that day. So there you stand, dressed in your itchy, smelly, lice-infested medieval outfit, ready to face a day that will test every limit of human endurance. You look like a cross between a homeless person and someone who's just survived a natural disaster, which, in a way, you've survived being born in 10th century Scandinavia, and now it's time to go to work. Because in the Viking world, there are no sick days, no vacation time, and no retirement plan beyond die gloriously in battle and hope Odin notices. Now that you're dressed in your mobile parasite habitat, it's time to start your workday. And by workday, I mean 12-16 hours of back-breaking labor that would violate every workplace safety regulation ever written, if those existed, which they don't. If you're a man, your job options are limited, but equally terrible. Farmer, craftsman, raider, or dead, sometimes multiple categories at once. If you're a woman, congratulations, you get to do everything the men do, plus bear children, manage the household, and somehow keep everyone alive through the winter. Equal opportunity suffering at its finest. Let's start with farming, because someone has to grow the food that will barely keep you alive through the long, dark winter. Viking agriculture is less working with nature and more screaming at dirt until something edible grows. The growing season in Scandinavia is short, maybe 4 months if you're lucky, and the soil is rocky, acidic, and generally hostile to the concept of plant life. Your tools are primitive, a wooden plow pulled by oxen if you're wealthy, or pulled by yourself if you're not. The plow barely scratches the surface of the ground, so you'll need to go over the same field multiple times. The plow doesn't have a moldboard, so it doesn't actually turn the soil. It just makes furrows that you'll have to work by hand with a hoe. The hoe is your best friend and worst enemy. It's basically a sharpened piece of iron attached to a wooden handle, and you'll be swinging it thousands of times a day. Your hands will blister, then callous, then blister again. Your back will scream. Your shoulders will feel like they're being slowly pulled from their sockets. But if you stop, your family starves. So you keep swinging. Planting is done by hand, seed by precious seed. You walk up and down the furrows, dropping seeds into the ground, and hoping that more of them will grow, than will be eaten by birds, insects, or the various other creatures that think your hard work is their personal buffet. Harvesting is even worse. You cut the grain with a sickle, which is basically a curved knife that's designed to be as inefficient as possible. Each stalk has to be cut individually, bent over, gathered and bundled. Your back stays bent for hours at a time. Your hands get cut by the sharp grain stalks. Your legs cramp from the constant crouching and standing. After harvesting comes threshing, beating the grain with flails to separate the grain from the stalks. This is done on a hard surface, usually a flat rock, and involves hours of rhythmic beating, while grain chaff flies everywhere, getting in your eyes, nose, mouth, and lungs. By the end of a day of threshing, you look like you've been rolled in flour and beaten with sticks. which technically you have. Then there's winnowing, throwing the grain into the air so the wind can blow away the chaff. This only works if there's wind, which there isn't always. Sometimes you have to create your own wind by fanning the grain with baskets or cloths, which is exactly as tedious as it sounds. If you're not farming, maybe you're a craftsman. Congratulations, your life is slightly different but equally miserable. Blacksmithing means working next to a forge that's hot enough to melt iron, in a building that's either stifling hot or freezing cold depending on how close you're standing to the fire. You're constantly burned by sparks, deafened by the hammering, and slowly poisoned by the smoke and metal fumes. Woodworking means cutting down trees with an axe, splitting logs with wedges and mallets, and shaping wood with tools that would be considered primitive by Stone Age standards. Every cut is made by hand. Every surface is smoothed with rough stones or scrapers. A simple wooden bowl takes hours to make, and there's always demand for more bowls because the old ones keep breaking or being eaten by insects. Textile work, spinning, weaving, dyeing, is primarily women's work, but it's no less brutal. Spinning thread on a hand spindle takes forever and requires constant attention. Drop the spindle, and hours of work can be ruined. Weaving on a vertical loom means standing for hours, threading the warp and weft by hand, creating fabric inch by painstaking inch. And then there's the most glamorous Viking occupation, raiding. Hollywood has given you the impression that raiding is all about sailing to exotic locations and having glorious battles with worthy opponents. The reality is that raiding is mostly sailing in an open boat across the North Sea in weather that wants to kill you, landing on hostile shores where everyone wants to kill you, and then hiking for miles carrying heavy weapons and armor to attack people who are probably just trying to get through their day like everyone else. The raiding season is short, late spring to early fall, because sailing in winter is suicide. The rest of the year, you're back to farming or crafts or whatever other mind-numbing labor will keep you alive until the next raiding season. But here's the thing about Viking work. There are no weekends, there are no holidays, there are no coffee breaks or lunch hours or quitting time. You work from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, until you die. The only breaks you get are when you're too sick to work. And being too sick to work usually means you're dying. Sunday isn't a day of rest, it's just another day to struggle against the fundamental hostility of existence. Your religion promises that if you die gloriously in battle, you'll go to Valhalla and feast with the gods. But most Vikings don't die gloriously in battle. They die of disease, starvation, accidents, or just the slow grinding wear of trying to survive in a world that doesn't want them to. So you work. You work until your hands bleed, until your back breaks, until your spirit is crushed into tiny pieces. And then you work some more, because the alternative is death, and death, while arguably more restful, doesn't help your family survive the winter. Just when you think your day can't get any worse, Mother Nature decides to remind you who's really in charge. Weather in Viking Age Scandinavia isn't just an inconvenience, it's an active, malevolent force that's constantly trying to murder you in creative and unpleasant ways. Let's start with winter, which lasts approximately 11 months of the year. I'm exaggerating, but only slightly. The actual winter in medieval Norway could easily run from October to April, and that's being optimistic. During this time, the sun becomes a theoretical concept, like democracy or personal hygiene. The temperature drops to levels that would make a modern person call in sick to life itself. We're talking about weeks or months where the mercury doesn't rise above freezing. Your breath becomes visible clouds, your spit freezes before it hits the ground, and exposed skin can develop frostbite in minutes. There's no central heating, no insulation worth mentioning, and definitely no weather stripping. Your longhouse is basically a wooden tent that's slightly better than being outside, but only slightly. The fire in the center provides some warmth, but only if you're standing directly next to it. Move more than a few feet away, and you might as well be in Antarctica. The fire itself is a constant battle. Wood needs to be gathered, chopped, dried, and carefully rationed, because running out of fuel means death. The fire produces smoke, lots of it, and since your house doesn't have proper ventilation, that smoke has nowhere to go except into your lungs. You spend the winter months slowly suffocating yourself to avoid freezing to death. It's a lifestyle choice that makes sense only in the context of Viking logic. Snow doesn't just fall, it attacks. Blizzards can dump several feet of snow in a single storm, effectively trapping you inside your longhouse for days or weeks at a time. Going outside in a blizzard is suicide, but staying inside means slowly consuming your stored food and fuel, while hoping the storm ends before you run out of either. The snow doesn't melt conveniently in spring. It sits there, getting dirty and crusty and harboring all sorts of nasty bacteria and parasites. When it finally does melt, it creates a muddy, slushy nightmare that makes travel nearly impossible and turns every surface into a disease-breeding swamp. But winter isn't the only meteorological enemy. Spring brings the thaw, which sounds pleasant until you realize that thaw means all the organic matter that's been frozen and preserved all winter suddenly starts decomposing at once. The smell is indescribable. Imagine the worst garbage dump you've ever smelled. Multiply that by 100, and then remember that you have to live in it. The thaw also brings flooding. Rivers that have been frozen solid for months suddenly burst their banks, carrying away buildings, livestock, and anything else that isn't nailed down. Roads become impassable rivers of mud and meltwater. Travel becomes impossible, just when you most need to start planting crops. Summer, when it finally arrives, brings its own special hell. The sun, which has been absent for most of the year, suddenly decides to make up for lost time by never setting. In northern Scandinavia, you get months of continuous daylight, which sounds great until you realize that it makes sleeping impossible and drives people literally insane. The brief summer also brings insects, clouds of mosquitoes, biting flies, and other tiny creatures that see your exposed skin as an all-you-can-eat buffet. There's no insect repellent, no screens on windows, there are no windows, and no escape. You're constantly slapping at bugs, scratching bites, and trying not to inhale the swarms of gnats that hover around your face. Rain in summer isn't refreshing. It's cold, constant, and soaks through your wool clothing, where it stays wet for days. Wet wool smells like wet sheep, weighs twice as much as dry wool, and takes forever to dry. You spend most of the summer walking around in soggy, stinking clothes that chafe your skin raw. The growing season is so short that a single unexpected frost, hailstorm, or drought can destroy an entire year's crop. Weather isn't just uncomfortable, it's literally a matter of life and death. A bad harvest means starvation. A harsh winter means death. A wet summer means disease. And there's no weather forecast, no advance warning, no way to prepare except by constantly expecting the worst. You wake up every morning not knowing if today will bring killing frost, devastating storms, or just the usual misery of trying to survive in a climate that seems designed by a god who really doesn't like humans. The Vikings developed their reputation for toughness, not because they were naturally hardy, but because anyone who wasn't tough enough died before they could reproduce. The weather was a constant, brutal selection pressure that weeded out anyone who couldn't handle extreme hardship as a daily routine. So you stand there in your soggy wool clothes, shivering in the rain, squinting through the clouds of insects, and wondering if this is the storm that finally kills you. And it's only noon. You've got at least 6 more hours of weather to survive before you can crawl back into your smoky, flea-infested longhouse and pretend to sleep while the wind howls outside like the voices of everyone who didn't make it through last winter. Mother Nature isn't nurturing. She's a serial killer with seasonal affective disorder and an unlimited supply of ice, wind, and things that bite. By now you're probably desperately thirsty. The morning porridge was like eating sand. You've been working in the cold for hours, and your mouth tastes like it's been stuffed with old leather. Time for a refreshing drink of water, right? Wrong. So very wrong. Water in Viking Age Scandinavia is less life-giving necessity and more transparent death potion. Every water source is contaminated with something that wants to kill you. Rivers carry runoff from farms, where animal waste and rotting organic matter have been accumulating all winter. Wells, if they exist, are typically shallow and easily contaminated by groundwater that's absorbed decades of human and animal waste. The concept of water purification won't be properly understood for another 1,000 years. Vikings know that boiling water makes it safer to drink, but they don't understand why, and they don't always have the time, fuel, or equipment to boil every drop of water they consume. So what do you drink instead? Ale. Lots and lots of ale. Viking ale isn't the carefully crafted, precisely balanced beverage you might find in a modern craft brewery. This is basically liquid bread that's been allowed to ferment until it develops enough alcohol to kill most of the bacteria living in it. Most of the bacteria, not all of them. The brewing process starts with barley or other grains that are malted, soaked in water until they sprout, then dried and ground. This malt is mixed with hot water to create a sweet liquid called wort. The wort is then fermented with wild yeasts that are floating around in the environment, which means you never know exactly what you're going to get. Sometimes the fermentation goes well, and you get a mildly alcoholic beverage that won't immediately kill you. Sometimes wild bacteria get into the mix, and you get something that tastes like vinegar mixed with regret. Sometimes you get something that's technically alcoholic, but tastes like it was filtered through a bog. The alcohol content is low, maybe 2 to 4% on a good day, so you can drink it throughout the day without falling over, but you're still consuming alcohol from morning to night, every day, for your entire life. Vikings aren't drunk exactly, but they're not sober either. They exist in a permanent state of mild intoxication that helps dull the constant pain of existing in the 10th century. Ale is stored in wooden barrels or ceramic vessels that are never properly cleaned. The containers develop a layer of bacteria, wild yeasts, and other microorganisms that add their own special flavor to each batch. After a few years, the container itself is more alive than dead. For special occasions, wealthy Vikings might have access to mead, fermented honey wine that's much stronger than ale, and infinitely more expensive. Honey has to be gathered from wild beehives, which is dangerous, difficult work that often involves being stung hundreds of times by angry bees. The resulting mead is sweet, potent, and reserved for important ceremonies, religious rituals, and bribing people not to kill you. Wine exists, but it's imported from warmer climates and costs more than most Vikings earn in a year. Having wine means you're either incredibly wealthy, or you've just successfully raided a monastery that had good connections with Mediterranean traders. Milk is available if you own cows, goats, or sheep, but fresh milk spoils within hours in the absence of refrigeration. Most milk is consumed immediately after milking, or it's allowed to sour and become a kind of primitive yogurt that has the texture of chunky paste and the flavor of liquid disappointment. During winter, when the cows aren't producing milk and the grain stores are running low, Vikings sometimes resort to more creative beverages. There's birch beer, made from the sap of birch trees. There's pine needle tea, which is about as appealing as it sounds. There are various herbal concoctions made from whatever plants survived the winter, most of which taste like boiled weeds, because that's exactly what they are. The drinking vessels are as primitive as everything else. Most people drink from wooden cups, carved horn cups, or ceramic bowls. These containers are rarely washed with anything more than a quick rinse, so they accumulate layers of residue that add their own unique flavor to whatever you're drinking. Communal drinking is common. The same cup is passed around the group, sharing germs, bacteria, and whatever communicable diseases everyone has picked up recently. In a culture where personal hygiene is more of a suggestion than a practice, communal drinking vessels are basically biological warfare devices disguised as social customs. And here's the kicker. Despite all this, you're still probably dehydrated most of the time. The ale doesn't hydrate you as well as water would. The salty preserved foods make you thirsty, and the constant physical labor makes you sweat out what little fluid you're managing to retain. So you drink your sour, bacteria-laden ale from a dirty wooden cup that's been shared with everyone in the longhouse, and you're grateful for it because the alternative is dying of thirst or drinking water that will give you dysentery so severe you'll wish you had died of thirst instead. Cheers to Viking life, where even the drinks are trying to kill you, but slowly enough that you might survive until tomorrow. Now that you've consumed your questionable breakfast and even more questionable ale, it's time to flash that winning smile. Except you can't, because smiling in Viking Age Scandinavia is a risky proposition that might reveal the horror show that is your mouth. Dental hygiene is a concept so foreign, it might as well be theoretical physics. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no dental floss, and definitely no gentle reminders from your dentist about proper oral care. Your teeth are on their own, locked in a daily battle against everything you eat, drink, and accidentally chew on. The Viking diet is particularly hostile to dental health. The coarse, gritty bread is like chewing on sandpaper mixed with small rocks. Literally, grains were often ground on stone querns, and tiny pieces of stone regularly ended up in the flour, so every meal is slowly grinding your teeth down to nubs while simultaneously adding abrasive particles to speed up the process. The dried fish that makes up a large part of the diet has the consistency of leather and about as much flavor. Chewing through a piece of stockfish is a workout for your jaw muscles and a torture session for your teeth. The fish is preserved with salt, which is corrosive to tooth enamel, and it's often partially decomposed, which adds its own special cocktail of bacteria to your mouth. Hard cheese, when available, is rock solid and requires serious commitment to consume. Nuts and seeds are eaten shell and all, because removing shells is time-consuming and wastes precious calories. Your teeth serve as nutcrackers, grain mills, and general-purpose tools for processing whatever tough, fibrous materials you need to consume to stay alive. By the time you're 30, if you make it to 30, your teeth look like a medieval battlefield. They're worn down, cracked, stained, and often missing entirely. The survivors are usually loose, painful, and discolored to a shade that doesn't exist in nature. Tooth decay is rampant. Without sugar, you might think cavities would be less of a problem, but the Viking diet includes plenty of fermented grains and fruits that produce acids capable of eating through tooth enamel, like a patient but determined acid bath. The bacteria in your mouth have plenty to feed on, and they're not picky about what they destroy in the process. Pain management for dental problems consists of chewing on willow bark, which contains a compound similar to aspirin, or drinking enough ale to make you forget about the throbbing agony in your jaw. Neither method is particularly effective, but they're your only options besides extracting the tooth yourself with whatever tools you have handy. Tooth extraction is performed by whoever has the steadiest hands and the strongest stomach in your community. This might be the local wise woman, the blacksmith, or just your cousin who's good with a pair of pliers. There's no anesthesia beyond alcohol, no antiseptic beyond hope, and no follow-up care beyond try not to die of infection. The extraction process involves gripping the tooth with crude iron tools and yanking it out by brute force. Sometimes the tooth comes out cleanly. Sometimes it breaks off at the root, leaving infected fragments embedded in your jaw. Sometimes the person doing the extraction slips and breaks your jaw. It's always an adventure, and not the fun kind. Gum disease is so common, it's basically a universal Viking experience. Your gums are swollen, bleeding and receding, creating pockets where food particles and bacteria accumulate and throw tiny parties that smell like death. The combination of poor nutrition, constant physical stress, and complete lack of dental care creates perfect conditions for every oral pathogen known to medieval medicine. Bad breath isn't just common, it's weaponized. A Viking's breath could probably be used in siege warfare. The combination of rotting teeth, infected gums, and a diet consisting largely of fermented fish creates an oral ecosystem that's actively hostile to anyone within speaking distance. Social interactions become a delicate dance of trying to communicate without breathing directly on anyone. Conversations are conducted at arm's length, with participants constantly turning their heads to avoid the full force of each other's exhalations. Romance becomes challenging when kissing might actually constitute biological warfare. And here's the really fun part. Tooth problems can kill you. Abscessed teeth can lead to infections that spread to your brain, heart, or bloodstream. What starts as a simple toothache can become a death sentence within days. There are no antibiotics, no surgical procedures, no medical interventions beyond extraction and prayer. Many Vikings die not from battle wounds or raiding accidents, but from tooth infections that modern medicine could cure with a simple prescription. It's an inglorious way to go, killed not by an enemy's axe, but by your own mouth's inability to cope with the basic requirements of staying alive. So when you wake up each morning with that familiar throb in your jaw, that loose tooth that wobbles when you talk, that infected gum that tastes like copper and despair, you're reminded that in the Viking world, even eating is a potentially fatal activity. But at least your breath smells so bad that most of your enemies will keep their distance. It's not much of a silver lining, but in Viking Age Scandinavia, you take your advantages where you can find them. So far you've survived waking up, using the bathroom, eating, drinking, and existing with your mouth. Congratulations, you've made it to the most famous part of Viking life, violence. This is where Hollywood would have you believe that Vikings were noble warriors engaged in honorable combat with worthy opponents. The reality is that Viking warfare is less glorious battle and more creative applications of sharp objects in situations where everyone involved would rather be somewhere else. Let's start with your weapons, assuming you can afford any. A proper sword is worth more than most people earn in several years. These aren't mass-produced items rolling off an assembly line. Each sword is hand-forged by a skilled smith, who might spend weeks creating a single blade. The iron has to be smelted from bog ore, hammered into shape while hot, folded and refolded to create layers of metal, then sharpened, polished and fitted with a handle. Vikings named their swords like beloved pets or family members. Legbiter, woundhoe, life-taker. These aren't just poetic flourishes, they're practical descriptions of what the weapon does to people. But most Vikings can't afford swords. Your weapon is more likely to be a spear, which is basically a sharp piece of iron attached to a long wooden shaft. Spears are cheaper to make, easier to use, and more versatile than swords. You can thrust with them, throw them, use them as walking sticks, or prop up your tent. The downside is that everyone else also has spears, so battles often look like deadly versions of jousting tournaments. Axes are popular because they're tools as well as weapons. The same axe you use to chop firewood can split someone's skull in half if necessary. Viking axes are designed for efficiency. They're not the massive, unwieldy weapons you see in movies. They're lightweight, perfectly balanced, and capable of devastating damage in skilled hands. Your shield is made of wood covered with hide and held together with iron rivets. It's round, about 3 feet in diameter, and weighs enough that carrying it for hours will leave your arm feeling like overcooked pasta. The shield isn't just for defense. You can bash people with it. Use it to deflect attacks into other enemies, or prop yourself up when you're bleeding out on the battlefield. Armor, if you have any, consists of a mail shirt, made of thousands of interlocking iron rings. Each ring is individually forged and connected to its neighbors by hand. A mail shirt might contain 20,000 rings and take months to complete. It's flexible, relatively lightweight, and effective against slashing attacks. It's also incredibly expensive and offers limited protection against spear thrusts, arrows, or blunt force trauma. Most Vikings fight wearing whatever clothes they normally wear, perhaps with a helmet if they're lucky. The famous horned helmets, they don't exist. They're a romantic invention of 19th century opera designers. Real Viking helmets are simple iron caps designed to deflect blows from the top and sides of the head. Some have face guards or nose pieces, but most are just basic skull protection. Fighting itself is nothing like the choreographed sword fights you see in movies. Real combat is chaotic, terrifying, and over quickly. Men scream, cry, vomit from fear, and soil themselves when they're wounded. The noise is overwhelming, metal clashing against metal, men shouting orders or prayers, the wounded screaming for help or their mothers. Formation fighting is preferred when possible. Vikings fight in shield walls, lines of men standing shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears protruding like a deadly porcupine. The idea is to present a unified front that's difficult to break through. In practice, shield walls usually dissolve into individual combat within minutes, because maintaining formation requires training and discipline that most Viking forces lack. Single combat is brutal, and usually brief. Two men approach each other with weapons drawn, each looking for an opening, an advantage, a mistake by the opponent. The first person to land a solid blow usually wins, because medieval weapons are designed to cause massive trauma. There's no gentle sparring, no pulling punches, no fighting until someone yields. You fight until someone dies or is too wounded to continue. Wounds are horrific. A sword cut can slice through muscle and bone, leaving limbs hanging by strips of skin. Spear thrusts punch holes through vital organs. Axe blows crush skulls and sever limbs. Arrow wounds are particularly nasty because the arrowheads are designed to be difficult to remove. They have barbs that tear flesh when someone tries to pull them out. Medical care on the battlefield consists of whatever first aid the survivors can provide with no training and primitive tools. Bleeding is controlled by pressure, if possible. Wounds are bandaged with whatever cloth is available, often clothing stripped from the dead. Pain management is alcohol, if any is available, or biting down on a piece of leather and hoping you pass out quickly. Many warriors die not from their initial wounds but from infection, blood loss or shock in the hours or days following a battle. What looks like a minor wound can become fatal if dirt gets into it, if it becomes infected, or if it damages internal organs that can't be seen or treated. And here's something Hollywood never shows you. Most of the people Vikings fought weren't warriors. They were farmers, merchants, monks, and villagers who had no military training and no desire to fight. Raiding wasn't about glorious combat between equals. It was about attacking people who couldn't defend themselves and taking their stuff before running away. The victims of Viking raids weren't armed soldiers waiting for honorable combat. They were people like you, trying to get through their day, who suddenly found themselves facing armed men who wanted to kill them and steal everything they owned. The glorious Viking warrior was often just a man with a weapon attacking people without weapons. But even successful raiders faced constant danger. Ships could sink in storms, stranding the crew in hostile territory. Local populations might organize effective resistance. Rival Viking groups might attack each other over territory or loot. Disease could wipe out entire crews during long voyages. And if you survived all that, you still had to make it home with your loot, which made you a target for every desperate person between you and safety. Success in raiding didn't guarantee survival. It just changed the nature of the threats you faced. So as you stand there in your borrowed armor, gripping your second-hand weapon, preparing for glorious battle, remember that most Viking warriors died inglorious deaths from infected wounds, disease, or accidents that had nothing to do with heroism or honor. Combat wasn't noble. It was a messy, terrifying, often pointless way to die young and in pain. But at least if you died in battle, the skalds might make up a song about you. Probably not a very good song, but better than dying of dysentery and being remembered as that guy who couldn't handle the fish. After a long day of backbreaking labor and contemplating violent death, you finally return to your longhouse. This is supposed to be your sanctuary, your safe haven, your escape from the harsh realities of Viking life. Instead, it's a wooden prison filled with everything that's wrong with medieval living. The longhouse is the architectural equivalent of giving up on life, but not being allowed to die. It's a rectangular building, maybe 100 feet long and 20 feet wide, with walls made of wooden planks, stone and turf. The roof is thatched with straw, which sounds quaint until you realize that thatch is basically a sponge that absorbs moisture and then slowly releases it as a fine mist throughout the interior. The building has no windows, because glass doesn't exist, and opening holes in the walls would let in all the cold air that you're desperately trying to keep out. Light comes from the doorway, a few small openings near the roof, and whatever firelight you can generate without burning the place down. Most of the time the interior is dark enough that you navigate by memory and prayer. The floor is packed earth covered with straw, rushes, and whatever organic matter has accumulated over the years. It's not cleaned so much as occasionally refreshed with new straw thrown over the old straw, creating layers of decomposing vegetation that squelch underfoot and release interesting smells when disturbed. The central hearth is supposed to provide heat and light for the entire building. In practice, it creates a column of warm air directly above the fire and leaves the rest of the space only slightly warmer than the outside temperature. The hearth also produces enormous amounts of smoke, which is supposed to escape through holes in the roof. Most of it doesn't. Instead, the smoke hovers at eye level throughout the longhouse, creating a permanent haze that makes breathing an adventure and gives everyone chronic coughs that sound like dying seals. Your eyes water constantly, your lungs burn, your clothing absorbs the smoke and holds onto it like a treasured memory. Privacy doesn't exist. The longhouse is divided into sections by hanging cloth or wooden partitions. But these don't block sound, smell, or the general awareness that 20 other people are sharing your living space. Every conversation is public. Every argument becomes community entertainment. Every intimate moment is performed for an involuntary audience of family members who are pretending not to listen, but definitely listening. The sleeping arrangements are particularly grim. Everyone sleeps on wooden platforms covered with furs and straw. The platforms are arranged along the walls, with multiple people sharing each sleeping area. Personal space is measured in inches. Rolling over in your sleep means bumping into someone else, who will then wake up and bump into someone else, creating a chain reaction of disturbed sleep that ripples through the entire household. The furs that serve as bedding haven't been properly cleaned since they were removed from whatever animal donated them to your comfort. They smell like wet dog, old blood, and things that prefer not to be identified. They're home to entire ecosystems of insects, parasites and bacteria that see your warm body as a luxury resort. Storage is wherever you can find space to put things. There are no closets, no cabinets, no organized systems for keeping track of possessions. Everything you own is either hanging from the walls, stacked in corners, or stored in wooden chests that also serve as furniture. Finding anything requires archaeological excavation through layers of accumulated stuff. Food storage happens in the same space where you sleep, which means you're constantly surrounded by the smells of aging fish, fermented grains, and whatever else is slowly decomposing in the vicinity. The livestock also live in the longhouse during winter, adding their own aromatic contributions to the indoor atmosphere. Speaking of livestock, sharing your living space with cows, pigs, chickens, and goats means dealing with animal waste, animal diseases, and the general chaos that comes with trying to maintain property boundaries when a pig decides your sleeping area looks like a comfortable place to give birth. The animals are kept at one end of the longhouse, theoretically separated from the human living areas. In practice, they wander around freely, eating whatever they can find, leaving deposits wherever they happen to be, and generally treating the entire space as their personal barnyard. Noise is constant and unavoidable. People talking, arguing, snoring, coughing, and conducting the various bodily functions that come with being human. Animals lowing, squealing, clucking, and making whatever sounds indicate contentment or distress. The building itself creaking, settling, and occasionally dropping pieces of thatch or timber from the ceiling. Sleep, when you can achieve it, is interrupted by fleas, lice, bedbugs, and other creatures that see nighttime as feeding time. You're constantly scratching, swatting, and shifting position to avoid the worst of the insect activity. Deep sleep is rare and precious. Ventilation is whatever air movement you can create by opening doors or adjusting the roof openings. Most of the time, the air inside is stagnant, humid, and saturated with smoke, cooking odors, and the accumulated exhalations of everyone living in the space. Disease spreads through the longhouse like gossip at a wedding. One person gets sick, and within days everyone is coughing, sneezing, or developing mysterious rashes. There's no way to quarantine the sick, no way to prevent transmission, and no effective treatments for most illnesses. And this is your home. This is where you're supposed to rest, recover, and prepare for another day of medieval suffering. This is your refuge from the harsh world outside, which should tell you something about how harsh the outside world really is. But at least you're out of the rain, usually, when the roof isn't leaking, which it is about half the time, and at least you're with family, even if family members are also the source of most of your daily irritation, and the reason you sometimes fantasize about living alone in a cave somewhere. Home sweet home, where the heart is, and the heart is slowly being poisoned by smoke inhalation and chronic stress. Now that you're back in your smoke-filled, livestock-sharing, privacy-free longhouse, it's time to interact with your family. And by interact, I mean try to coexist without killing each other before bedtime. Viking family life is like a reality TV show, but with more dysentery and fewer commercial breaks. Your family isn't just the people you share DNA with. It's everyone who lives in the longhouse, works the same land, and has a vested interest in your continued survival. This includes parents, siblings, spouses, children, in-laws, cousins, adopted children, slaves, and probably a few people whose relationship to you is unclear but who've been around so long they're part of the furniture. The family hierarchy is strict and unforgiving. The oldest male is the head of the household, with absolute authority over everyone else's lives. His word is law, his decisions are final, and disagreeing with him is a good way to find yourself sleeping outside with the goats. Below him are the other adult males, ranked by age, fighting ability, and contribution to the family's survival. Women have their own hierarchy, usually based on their relationship to the men, and their usefulness in keeping everyone alive. The oldest woman, typically the head male's wife or mother, manages the domestic operations, food preparation, textile production, childcare, and making sure the family doesn't die of preventable stupidity. Children are ranked by age and gender, with older male children having more status than younger ones or females. But all children are essentially property until they're old enough to contribute meaningfully to the family's survival. Child labor isn't controversial, it's essential. Everyone works, including toddlers who can barely walk but can definitely carry small objects or chase chickens. Slaves, if the family owns any, are at the bottom of the hierarchy. These are people captured during raids, bought from other families, or born into servitude. They have no rights, no property, and no hope of freedom unless the family decides to free them, which happens about as often as successful peace negotiations with angry bears. Decision-making is theoretically democratic, but only among adult males who have proven their worth. Women can offer opinions, but their input is valued primarily on domestic matters. Children speak only when spoken to, and slaves don't speak at all unless they want to risk a beating. Conflict resolution within the family is handled through a combination of shouting, physical intimidation, and appeals to tradition. Disagreements escalate quickly because everyone is stressed, undernourished, and living in uncomfortably close quarters. Violence isn't just possible, it's common. Domestic abuse is considered normal family discipline. Marriage within the extended family group is arranged for political and economic reasons. Love is a luxury that most people can't afford. Marriages are business partnerships designed to strengthen the family's position, acquire useful resources, or form alliances with other families. The bride and groom's feelings about each other are irrelevant. Divorce exists but is complicated and expensive. A woman can divorce her husband for specific reasons: failure to provide, physical abuse beyond the socially acceptable level, or abandonment. A man can divorce his wife for almost any reason, or no reason at all. Either way, divorce involves dividing property, determining custody of children, and potentially starting blood feuds between families. Children start working as soon as they can walk. Toddlers collect eggs, chase stray animals, and carry messages. By age 5, they're helping with cooking, cleaning, and basic crafts. By age 10, they're doing adult work under supervision. By age 15, they're fully contributing members of the household economy. Education consists of learning whatever skills will keep you alive and productive. Boys learn farming, fighting, and crafts. Girls learn domestic skills, textile production, and how to manage households. Reading and writing are rare skills, limited to the wealthy and powerful. Most people are functionally illiterate throughout their entire lives. Childhood ends early and abruptly. There's no concept of adolescence or extended childhood. You're either a child who needs protection and guidance, or you're an adult who contributes to the family's survival. The transition happens whenever you're physically capable of adult work, which might be as early as 12 or 13. This might include storytelling, singing, games with dice or carved pieces, and the occasional celebration when someone gets married, dies, or survives something that should have killed them. Storytelling is particularly important because it's how the family's history, traditions, and values are passed down to the next generation. These aren't just stories, they're instruction manuals for how to be a proper Viking, how to handle conflict, and how to maintain the family's reputation and honor. Religious observance happens within the family context. There are no churches or organized religious services. Instead, the family performs its own rituals, makes its own offerings to the gods, and interprets religious traditions according to their own understanding and needs. Death in the family is both a personal tragedy and an economic disaster. Every family member represents accumulated knowledge, skills, and labor that can't be easily replaced. When someone dies, the survivors have to pick up the slack while also dealing with grief, fear, and the practical challenges of disposing of the body in a climate where the ground might be frozen solid. Elderly family members are cared for as long as they can contribute something useful, even if it's just wisdom or storytelling. When they become a burden that the family can't afford, they might be quietly encouraged to wander off into the wilderness and not come back. It's not cruel, it's practical resource management in a world where sentiment is a luxury most people can't afford. Mediating disputes over who gets the last piece of dried fish, and trying not to breathe too deeply because Uncle Olaf hasn't bathed since the harvest festival. Remember that these people are your entire social world. They're your economic security, your entertainment system, your medical care, your retirement plan, and your funeral directors. Love them or hate them, you're stuck with them until death do you part. And death is always lurking just outside the longhouse door, waiting for someone to make a mistake, get careless, or just run out of luck. Just when you think you've got the hang of Viking life, winter arrives like an uninvited relative who moves in permanently and eats all your food, except this relative is actively trying to kill you and everyone you care about. Winter in Viking Age Scandinavia isn't just a season, it's a siege that lasts for months. The temperature drops below freezing and stays there from October to April. The sun, already a rare visitor during the best of times, essentially gives up and goes on vacation. You get maybe 4 hours of weak grey light each day, and the rest is darkness, so complete it feels like the world has ended. Food becomes an obsession, because you're slowly consuming everything you stored during the brief summer growing season. Every meal is calculated against the remaining supplies and the number of days until spring. You know mathematically whether your family will starve before the next harvest. There's no grocery store, no relief supplies, no emergency food aid. When you run out, you die. Rationing becomes an art form. The family's food stores are carefully guarded and doled out in measured portions that are just enough to keep everyone alive, but not enough to satisfy anyone's hunger. Everyone goes to bed hungry every night. Children cry from hunger. Adults dream about food. The lucky families have enough to survive. The unlucky ones start eyeing the livestock and wondering how long they can stretch the meat if they butcher the animals slowly. Vitamin deficiency is a slow-motion disaster that affects everyone. Without fresh fruits or vegetables, scurvy becomes common. Your gums bleed, your teeth loosen, your joints ache, and your old wounds reopen. Rickets deforms children's growing bones. Night blindness makes the long dark hours even more dangerous. The cold is relentless and inescapable. There's no insulation in the longhouse beyond the body heat of all the people and animals crammed inside. The fire provides some warmth, but only if you're sitting directly next to it. Move more than a few feet away, and you might as well be outside. Fuel for the fire is precious and carefully rationed. Wood has to last the entire winter, so the fire is kept just large enough to prevent the water from freezing solid. Your breath is visible indoors. Ice forms on the walls. Your extremities are perpetually numb, and frostbite is a constant threat. Clothing becomes your primary survival equipment. You wear every piece of clothing you own, layered on top of each other like a fabric fortress against the cold. But medieval textiles aren't designed for extreme weather. Wool retains some warmth when wet, but it's heavy, scratchy, and never completely dry. Linen and hemp provide no insulation at all. Your outer cloak becomes your most important possession. It's your coat, your blanket, your tent, and your shroud. If things go badly, you sleep in it, work in it, and never take it off from the first frost until the spring thaw. By the end of winter, it's stiff with accumulated grime, sweat, and other substances you'd rather not identify. Bathing becomes impossible. Not that it was common during the warmer months. Water freezes solid, so any washing has to be done with snow melted over the fire, assuming you can spare the fuel. Most people simply stop washing entirely for months at a time. The accumulated filth becomes an extra layer of insulation, and the smell becomes so universal that nobody notices it anymore. Illness spreads rapidly through the confined space of the longhouse. Colds, flu, pneumonia, and other respiratory diseases pass from person to person like messages in a deadly game of telephone. There's no way to isolate the sick, no effective treatments, and no medical intervention beyond hoping the patient is strong enough to survive. Mental health deteriorates as surely as physical health. The combination of hunger, cold, confinement, and darkness creates conditions that would break modern people who have access to therapy, medication, and support systems. Depression becomes endemic. Cabin fever drives people to violence over trivial disputes. Suicide rates climb as people choose death over enduring another month of winter. Livestock die despite being brought indoors. The animals that survive consume precious food and fuel, while contributing to the already overwhelming odor and unsanitary conditions inside the longhouse. Dead animals can't be buried in the frozen ground, so they're stored outside where they freeze solid and serve as an emergency food supply if things get desperate enough. Water is a constant problem. Lakes and rivers freeze solid, making it difficult to access drinking water. Snow can be melted, but that requires fuel that's needed for heat and cooking. Wells, if they exist, often freeze solid or become contaminated with surface runoff when the spring thaw finally arrives. The darkness affects everyone's mental state. Without clocks or calendars, it becomes difficult to track time. Days blend together in an endless succession of cold, hungry misery. People lose track of what day it is, what month it is, or how long winter has been going on. Time becomes measured not in hours or days, but in meals consumed and fuel burned. Social tensions within the longhouse reach breaking points. People who could tolerate each other during the warmer months become unbearable when confined together for months at a time. Arguments over food, space, noise, and personal habits escalate into blood feuds that can last for generations. And through it all, you know that this is not an exceptional winter. This is just winter. Every year brings the same ordeal, the same suffering, the same test of whether you're tough enough to survive until spring. Some winters are worse than others, but none are easy, none are comfortable. None are anything but an extended battle between you and the fundamental hostility of the natural world. The weak die first, the elderly, the very young, the sick, and the unlucky. Their deaths are mourned briefly, then their bodies are stored outside with the livestock until the ground thaws enough for burial. Their food rations are redistributed among the survivors, who try not to think too hard about the mathematics of survival. By the time spring finally arrives, you've been transformed by the experience. You're thinner, weaker, scarred by months of deprivation and struggle. You've watched people die, participated in rationing decisions that determined who lived and who didn't, and learned exactly how much suffering you can endure before you break. But you survived. You made it through another winter in Viking Age Scandinavia, which makes you tougher than most humans who have ever lived. You've earned another chance to plant crops, raid neighbors, and prepare for the next winter that's already lurking just 10 months away. Spring, when it comes, feels like resurrection, but it's not salvation. It's just another phase in the endless cycle of seasonal survival that defines Viking life. In the modern world, your reputation is managed through social media posts, carefully curated photos, and online reviews. In Viking society, your reputation is literally a matter of life and death, managed through a complex system of honor, shame, and the ever-present threat of blood vengeance. Your reputation isn't just about what you think of yourself. It's about what the entire community thinks of you, your family, and your family's family going back several generations. This reputation, called your honor or worth, determines everything: who will trade with you, who will marry into your family, who will support you in disputes, and whether you'll be allowed to participate in community decisions. Honor is earned through courage in battle, generosity with your wealth, loyalty to your friends, and adherence to the complex web of social obligations that hold Viking society together. It can also be lost through cowardice, stinginess, betrayal, or failure to meet your obligations. Once lost, honor is almost impossible to regain, and dishonor spreads to your entire family like a social disease. The primary mechanism for reputation management is the Thing, a community assembly where legal disputes are resolved, laws are discussed, and social status is publicly displayed. The Thing isn't just a court or government meeting. It's a social media platform where everyone's dirty laundry is aired, reputations are made and destroyed, and community standings are adjusted based on public performance. At the Thing, you're expected to speak eloquently, argue persuasively, and demonstrate your worth through both words and actions. Your ability to compose and deliver verbal arguments is as important as your skill with weapons. A man who can't speak well at the Thing is considered only half a man, regardless of his physical prowess. Insults at the Thing aren't just verbal sparring, they're formal challenges to your honor that require responses. If someone calls you a coward, a liar, or implies that you have questionable parentage, you can't just ignore it and walk away. Failure to respond appropriately marks you as weak and destroys your reputation. But responding inappropriately can escalate the situation into a blood feud that lasts for generations. The escalation process is predictable and brutal. It starts with verbal insults, progresses to challenges and formal accusations, then moves to demands for compensation or public apologies. If those fail, it becomes a matter for weapons. What begins as a dispute over a pig or a property boundary can end with entire families wiped out over the course of years or decades. Women participate in reputation management differently, but no less intensely. They can't speak at the Thing, but they influence their male relatives' positions, manage household honor through hospitality and domestic competence, and sometimes instigate conflicts through calculated insults or strategic gossip. A woman who manages her household poorly brings shame to her entire family. A woman who manages it well brings honor that extends to her husband and children. Gossip is the primary information network in Viking society. News, opinions, and reputations spread through informal networks of women talking while they work, men discussing business during travels, and children repeating everything they overhear. There's no privacy, no secrets, and no way to control the narrative once a story starts spreading. Stories about your actions, successes, and failures become part of your permanent record. These stories are repeated, embellished, and passed down through generations. The Viking concept of immortality isn't about living forever. It's about being remembered in stories told around fires long after you're dead. A good death in battle gets you a good story. A shameful death gets you remembered as a cautionary tale. Poets called skalds function as a combination of journalists, PR agents, and social media influencers. They compose poems about current events, heroic deeds, and notable failures. Having a skald compose a poem about your exploits is like having a viral social media post. It spreads your reputation far beyond your local community. But skalds also compose satirical poems about people they don't like, and these can destroy reputations as effectively as praise can build them. Gift giving is another crucial component of reputation management. You're expected to be generous with your wealth, giving gifts to friends, supporters, and allies. These gifts create networks of obligation and loyalty that provide social insurance against hard times. But the gifts have to be appropriate to your status and wealth. Give too little, and you're seen as stingy. Give too much, and you're seen as wasteful or showing off. Hospitality is both an opportunity to display your wealth and status, and a test of your character. Guests must be fed, housed, and entertained regardless of your personal feelings about them or your ability to afford the expense. Poor hospitality brings lasting shame, but good hospitality brings reputation benefits that can last for years. Your appearance and possessions are constantly being evaluated by everyone around you. Your weapons, jewelry, clothing, and equipment all send messages about your success, status, and competence. Showing up to public events with inferior gear marks you as poor or unsuccessful, but showing up with gear that's clearly beyond your means marks you as pretentious or dishonest. Marriage negotiations are reputation management on a family level. The families involved are evaluating not just the potential bride and groom, but their entire extended family's honor, wealth, and social connections. A marriage between families with good reputations strengthens both sides. A marriage involving someone with a damaged reputation can drag down an entire family's standing. Legal disputes are public reputation contests as much as they are attempts to resolve actual problems. The way you handle conflict, the allies who support you, and the outcome of the dispute all become part of your permanent reputation. Win honorably, and your reputation is enhanced. Lose honorably, and you maintain respect. Win dishonorably, or lose shamefully, and your reputation is permanently damaged. And unlike modern social media, you can't delete posts, block trolls, or create new accounts. Your reputation follows you everywhere you go, affects every relationship you try to form, and influences every opportunity you might have. It's inherited by your children and influences their prospects for the rest of their lives. The pressure to maintain honor and avoid shame is constant and exhausting. Every interaction is a potential reputation event. Every decision has to be evaluated, not just for its practical consequences, but for its impact on your family's honor. The modern concept of work-life balance would be incomprehensible to Vikings. There is no separation between personal and public life, no privacy, and no escape from the constant evaluation of the community. So as you navigate the complex social dynamics of Viking society, remember that you're not just living your life, you're performing it for an audience that never stops watching, never forgets, and has the power to make your existence either bearable or absolutely miserable, based on their collective opinion of your worthiness. Now that you've survived the physical challenges of Viking life, let's talk about the spiritual dimension. And by spiritual, I mean the constant paralyzing fear that invisible supernatural forces are actively trying to ruin your day. Viking religion isn't the sanitized, romanticized Norse mythology you might know from Marvel movies or Neil Gaiman novels. It's a complex, terrifying belief system built around the fundamental assumption that the universe is hostile, the gods are unreliable, and everything that can go wrong probably will go wrong, usually at the worst possible moment. The gods themselves are not benevolent divine parents watching over their faithful children. They're powerful, capricious beings with their own agendas, personal problems, and tendency to use humans as pawns in cosmic games that mortals can't understand or influence. Odin, the All-Father, is a wandering wizard who trades his eye for wisdom and hangs himself from a tree for 9 days to learn magic. He's not the kind of deity you pray to for comfort and guidance. He's the kind you try not to attract the attention of. Thor, the thunder god, is more approachable, but not necessarily more helpful. He fights giants and protects humanity, but he's also got a temper problem and a tendency to solve problems by hitting them with his hammer. Praying to Thor might get you protection from monsters, but it might also get you caught in the crossfire of his ongoing war with the forces of chaos. Freya govern fertility, prosperity, and sexual desire, which sounds pleasant until you realize that Viking concepts of fertility involve blood sacrifice, ritual prostitution, and magical practices that would get you burned as a witch in later Christian societies. Want a good harvest? Better be prepared to sacrifice your best livestock and possibly participate in ceremonies that modern people would find deeply disturbing. The goddesses are no more comforting than the gods. Freya knows the fate of all beings but won't tell anyone what she knows. Hel rules the realm of the dead and decides who gets to die gloriously in battle and who gets to rot in her cold, miserable kingdom. The Norns weave the threads of fate, determining when and how everyone will die, and they're not taking requests or considering appeals. Death in Viking religion is complicated and terrifying. If you die in battle, you might go to Valhalla, where you'll spend eternity fighting, feasting, and preparing for Ragnarok, the end of the world. This sounds better than it is, because Ragnarok isn't a distant theoretical event. It's coming, it's inevitable, and when it arrives, everyone dies, including the gods. Your reward for a heroic death is the privilege of participating in the cosmic apocalypse. If you don't die in battle, you go to Hel's realm, which isn't necessarily punishment, but isn't exactly pleasant either. It's described as cold, dark, and boring, kind of like being dead, but with more bureaucracy. Some of the dead become Draga, undead creatures who guard their burial mounds and attack anyone who disturbs them. Others become various types of ghosts who haunt their descendants and make life difficult for the living. The living world is populated with supernatural creatures who range from mildly annoying to actively malevolent. Trolls live in the mountains and forests, kidnapping humans and eating them. Elves cause diseases, steal children, and replace human babies with changeling children who look normal but grow up wrong. Giants are constantly plotting to destroy civilization and bring about the end of the world. Closer to home, your own ancestors might become problems. The dead don't always stay dead in Viking belief. They can return as ghosts to settle unfinished business, seek revenge, or just generally make life unpleasant for their descendants. Proper burial rituals are essential for keeping the dead in their graves, but even perfect funeral arrangements don't guarantee that Great-Uncle Bjorn won't decide to come back and rearrange the furniture at night. Divination and fortune-telling are essential survival skills, because the future is always trying to kill you, and advance warning might give you a chance to prepare or avoid the worst outcomes. Vikings use various methods to predict the future: casting lots made from carved wood or bone, reading the patterns of bird flight, interpreting dreams, and examining the entrails of sacrificed animals. The problem with Viking divination is that it usually predicts doom, disaster, and death. The gods aren't subtle about their warnings. When they want to tell you something bad is coming, they send really obvious omens. Ravens gathering around your house means death is coming for someone in your family. Your weapons breaking before a battle means you're probably not coming home. Strange lights in the sky mean the end of the world is getting closer. Sacrificial rituals are performed to gain the gods' favor, ward off evil, ensure good harvests, and generally try to tip the cosmic scales in your favor. These aren't symbolic offerings of bread and wine. They're elaborate ceremonies involving the ritual slaughter of valuable animals and sometimes humans. The blood is sprinkled on altars, temples, and participants. The meat is eaten in communal feasts that serve both religious and social functions. Human sacrifice isn't common, but it's not unknown either. Kings and nobles might be sacrificed during times of extreme crisis. Slaves are sometimes killed during their masters' funerals to serve them in the afterlife. Criminals and prisoners of war might be offered to the gods in exchange for victory or divine favor. The methods of sacrifice are designed to be meaningful to the specific god being honored. Hangings for Odin, drownings for water spirits, burnings for fertility gods. Magic is real and dangerous. Some people, usually women called vulva or cider workers, can see the future, cast curses, heal diseases, and manipulate the supernatural forces that govern daily life. But magic comes with a price. Practitioners risk their sanity, their health, and their souls. Magic also carries social stigma, especially for men, because it's considered unmanly to rely on supernatural manipulation instead of physical strength and martial prowess. Curses are a constant concern, because anyone with magical knowledge can potentially destroy your life from a distance. A properly cast curse can cause illness, crop failure, livestock death, military defeat, and family discord. The effects of curses can last for generations, affecting not just the original target but their descendants. Breaking a curse requires either more powerful magic or making amends to whoever cast it in the first place. Protective magic is equally important. Amulets, carved runes, and ritual practices help ward off curses, evil spirits, and bad luck. Your weapons might be inscribed with runes to make them more effective in battle. Your house might be protected with symbols carved into the doorposts. Your livestock might wear amulets to protect them from disease and predators. But even protective magic isn't reliable. The supernatural forces at work in the Viking world are stronger than human magic, and the god's protection comes with strings attached. Odin might give you victory in battle, but he expects you to sacrifice the defeated enemies to him afterward. Thor might protect your crops from giants, but he expects generous offerings and proper worship in return. The constant awareness of supernatural threats creates a persistent low-level anxiety that affects every aspect of daily life. You can't just go about your business without considering whether your actions might anger the gods, attract the attention of malevolent spirits, or violate some cosmic principle that will bring disaster down on your head. Every decision has to be evaluated, not just for its practical consequences, but for its supernatural implications. Should you travel on a day when the omens are bad? Should you trust the strange old woman who offers to sell you a protective amulet? Should you disturb that ancient burial mound to get the valuable artifacts inside, knowing that the Draugr who guards it might come after you and your entire family? Religion doesn't provide comfort or peace of mind in Viking society. It provides a framework for understanding why life is so difficult and what you might be able to do to make it slightly less terrible. The best you can hope for is to live honorably, die well, and maybe earn enough divine favor to protect your family after you're gone. But even that isn't guaranteed, because the gods themselves are doomed. Ragnarok is coming, and when it arrives, the entire cosmic order will collapse. The gods will die, the world will burn, and everything you've worked for will be destroyed. A new world will rise from the ashes, but you won't be there to see it. So you make your offerings, perform your rituals, avoid the bad omens when possible, and hope that when your time comes, you'll be brave enough to face whatever supernatural horrors are waiting for you on the other side of death. Because in the Viking worldview, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to keep going despite knowing that everything is ultimately doomed. And there you have it, a single day in the life of a Viking, from the moment you wake up in your flea-infested fur bed, to the moment you fall asleep listening to the wind howling outside your longhouse, like the voices of everyone who didn't make it through the previous winter. You've survived waking up in a world that wants to kill you, relieving yourself in conditions that would violate every health code ever written, eating food that's actively trying to poison you, and working until your body screams for mercy. You've endured weather that treats human survival as a personal insult, drunk liquids that might charitably be called beverages, and navigated social dynamics that make modern office politics look like a friendly tea party. You've contemplated the various ways you might die violently, lived in a house that's less shelter than it is organized misery, dealt with family members who might murder you over a perceived slight, and worried constantly about supernatural forces that could destroy everything you care about without warning or explanation. and tomorrow you get to do it all again, and the day after that, and every day after that until you die, which might be tomorrow, next week, or if you're incredibly lucky and tough, maybe in another 20 or 30 years. The romantic image of Viking life, brave warriors sailing to distant lands, winning glory in battle, feasting in great halls while skalds sing of their heroic deeds, that's not entirely false. Some Vikings did experience moments of triumph, adventure, and genuine heroism, but those moments were brief interruptions in lives that were mostly composed of the grinding, relentless struggle to survive in a world that was fundamentally hostile to human existence. Most Vikings never sailed beyond their local fjord. Most never participated in famous raids or won great victories. Most lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born, working the same difficult land their ancestors had worked, struggling with the same problems, and dying of the same diseases that had killed their parents and would kill their children. The average Viking wasn't a fearsome warrior. They were a farmer who happened to live in a culture that glorified violence because violence was one of the few ways to improve your circumstances in a world where opportunities for advancement were limited and brutal. They weren't inherently more courageous than people from other cultures. They were just products of an environment that demanded constant courage because the alternative was death. But here's the thing about our Viking ancestors. They endured. They survived. They passed down their genes, their stories, their stubborn refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. They lived through conditions that would break most modern people, and they did it without the benefit of modern medicine, technology, or social support systems. They faced down winter storms that could kill an entire family in a single night. They survived famines that lasted for years. They endured plagues that wiped out entire communities. They lived through the collapse of civilizations, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the constant threat of violence from neighbors, strangers, and sometimes their own family members. And somehow, despite all of this, they found ways to create art, tell stories, compose poetry, and pass down wisdom to their descendants. They built ships that could cross oceans, developed legal systems that influenced modern democracy, and created mythologies that still capture our imagination more than 1,000 years later. The Vikings weren't superhuman. They were just human beings who happened to live in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. They felt fear, pain, loneliness, and despair, just like anyone else. But they also felt love, joy, hope, and pride. They formed deep friendships, created strong families, and built communities that could survive almost anything the world threw at them. When we romanticize Viking life, we miss the point. The impressive thing about the Vikings isn't that their lives were glamorous or enviable. It's that they managed to create meaning, purpose, and even happiness in the midst of circumstances that seem almost impossibly harsh from our modern perspective. They remind us that human beings are capable of extraordinary resilience, that survival is possible even when everything seems hopeless, and that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep going despite being afraid. So tonight, as you settle into your comfortable bed with your central heating and indoor plumbing, your refrigerated food and your instant communication with people around the world, maybe take a moment to appreciate just how easy your life is compared to your Viking ancestors. You don't have to worry about freezing to death in your sleep. You don't have to ration food to survive the winter. You don't have to fight for your life against armed raiders or die of diseases that modern medicine could cure with a simple prescription. You don't have to live in constant fear of supernatural retribution or social ostracism for minor violations of honor codes. Your biggest daily challenge probably isn't staying alive until sunset. You have luxuries that Viking royalty couldn't imagine. Hot showers, fresh food year-round, books, music, movies, and the reasonable expectation that you'll wake up tomorrow in the same world you went to sleep in tonight. But maybe, just maybe, you can also find some inspiration in their example. When your modern problems seem overwhelming, remember that your ancestors survived much worse with much less. When you feel like giving up, remember that you come from a long line of people who never gave up, no matter how bad things got. The Viking Age is over, but the human capacity for resilience, courage, and stubborn survival lives on. You carry their genes, their stories, and their refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Sleep well, knowing that you're tougher than you think, that your problems are more solvable than they seem, and that you come from a long line of survivors who made it through the long, dark winters, so that you could be here tonight, safe and warm and alive. The Vikings are gone, but their legacy lives on in everyone who refuses to give up, who finds strength in community, and who faces each day with the quiet courage that comes from knowing that no matter how hard life gets, human beings can endure almost anything if they stick together and never stop fighting for tomorrow. Sweet dreams, and remember, if your ancestors could survive being Vikings, you can survive whatever challenges you're facing today. The blood of survivors runs in your veins, and that's something worth sleeping peacefully on.